Hi, welcome back. So as we discussed in our course objective, the very first topic which we are going to talk about is Terraform overview. In Terraform overview, we will see or we will discuss about what is Terraform, how does Terraform work, why do we need Terraform, Terraform syntax, like how to write a code in Terraform, then benefits of Terraform, and then we will talk about the prerequisites to run Terraform. Okay, so let's start with what is Terraform or what is infrastructure as a code. So whenever we talk about the IT infrastructure, the very first thing comes in our mind are servers, storage, network devices, security devices, and the management of all these devices. This infrastructure basically helps us to host our websites, to run our application, to run our softwares. So this is basically our IT infrastructure. To deploy or to create this infrastructure or IT infrastructure or manage this IT infrastructure, there were several ways to do it. So before the infrastructure is a code thing, we were managing it or we were deploying these infrastructure services either through the GUI portal or the scripting language like a PowerShell or shell scripting. But now, as we have this infrastructure as a code technology or infrastructure as a code way to deploy the infrastructure, we can also deploy, create, manage, and maintain our infrastructure in the form of code. Okay. How it is different from the scripting, because scripting is also a code. Then why infrastructure as a code is different from the scripting? So this is something we are going to talk about in our why Terraform section. But infrastructure as a code is totally different than the scripting. And we can use the infrastructure as a code to build and to maintain our infrastructure. Especially when we are talking about the cloud technology, it's very easy to maintain our cloud resources, to deploy the resources, to manage the resources with the help of this infrastructure as a code. So similarly, like if we have any website or application, we know there is a code. So those are the application code, right? We are writing those code in a form, they will perform certain task, they will execute certain task, and based on that, that application or that website is working. Like you are registering a form in a website, there will be some code which is executing behind the scene, and they will register you on that particular website. So this is the application code. Similarly, in the infrastructure as a code, we can write the code to deploy the complete infrastructure. Like I wanted to deploy 10 virtual machine, some switches, some firewalls, some storage devices, some security related services. I can write all those services in a form of code. I can maintain all those services, deploy those services, even destroy those services with the help of the code. So this code is infrastructure as a code to maintain those infrastructure. And on top of that, then you will have your application code, which will serve the purpose of like executing or hosting your application of the website. So nowadays, with the help of the infrastructure as a code, we can have everything in a form of code, our infrastructure and our application and the websites. So this is what the infrastructure as a code is. Terraform is one of the tool which is in help or which introduce infrastructure as a code technology. The benefit of the Terraform is like it's a multi-cloud. You will get the same way to deploy the resources in a multiple cloud. You can even use the same code or in a same configuration file to deploy the resources in your multiple cloud environment if you are using the multi-cloud environment. Terraform also, the one of the benefit of Terraform is it's uh, it's working on the HashiCorp coding languages. So HashiCorp coding language is like a human readable language. It's very easy, and I'm sure like when we are going forward, you will learn it, and then you will realize like how easy it is to learn, to understand, and to write the code. So this is what the Terraform is, and this is what the infrastructure as a code is. The next topic which we are going to talk about is how does Terraform work. So let's assume there is a bunch of users who are writing the infrastructure as a code or the Terraform code. So they will write some code which will be your infrastructure as a code or your IAC configuration file where you're writing like you want to deploy the virtual machine, virtual network, subnet, you want to put that particular virtual machine A in a subnet A, you want to put virtual machine B in a subnet B, and there will be some other services as well which you want to integrate with each other, tied to each other. You will put all of your code, all of your infrastructure code in this particular file. With the Terraform or with the help of Terraform, what you could do is the very next step would be your plan. So the one of the benefit of the Terraform is before actually executing your code, you can do the planning, or you can do the plan and you can see what that particular code is going to do. So let's assume in my environment, I want to deploy 5 virtual machine in Azure with 1 virtual network and 5 subnet. Each virtual machine will be in each subnet. I can write all the code. Before actually deploying those resources in my Azure environment, I can actually do the plan and see what that particular code is going to do. With the help of the planning, you can see if that there is some unexpected task are going to happen. You can see in the plan and you can make sure like there is a virtual machine which I don't want to create, but my code is impacting somehow. Maybe I missed something. So with the help of plan, I can actually see what is going to happen. And based on that, I can prevent those accidental changes or accidental deletion. And I can see what is going to be happen in the plan. The very next step, which we are going to do, we will review this plan. If everything looks good, or if not, if there is some unexpected changes which I'm not intend to make, I can go back, make the changes into my infrastructure as a code in my Terraform code, do the planning again and review. So with the help of the plan, you can do this kind of a review. And if everything looks good after the review, then you can apply those changes. When you are going to apply these changes, it will be actually deploying in your Azure environment or AWS environment or your GCP or the Kubernetes. So this is basically a Terraform workflow where you write the code, you do the planning, you review the changes. If the changes are good, if this is what you intended to make, then you do the apply and those changes will be applied in your environment, in your cloud provider. And you will see all the resources over there. So this is how the Terraform works. We write the code, we do the planning, we review. If something needs to change, we go back, we make the changes into the code, do the planning again, review. If everything looks good now, then we can just apply and we can deploy those changes into the cloud. Okay, so yeah, this is all about how does Terraform work. The very next topic which we are going to talk about is why Terraform? Why do we need Terraform? So as this course is totally focused on the Azure, because we are going to talk about like how the Terraform works with the Azure, let's see what are the mechanism or what are the ways we can use in Azure to deploy the resources, to deploy the virtual machine, virtual network, all the firewall and other databases, services, app services and all. The very first way we do have is Azure portal. We can use the Azure portal as a GUI. We can just log into the portal and create our resources using the GUI method, or we can use the Azure PowerShell module. We can do the deployment using the Azure PowerShell as an scripting language. Then we can also use the Azure CLI, which is Azure own tool or Microsoft own tool to deploy the resources. So we can use all these 3 methods. Then why do we need the Terraform? What makes Terraform different from all this mechanism? So let's see how does Terraform do the things. Why do we need Terraform? So let's see. We do have the Terraform configuration file where we are writing the code. So the code we are writing into the file, this file is called configuration file in the Terraform. What Terraform configuration file do, as soon as we apply the changes, first it write a Terraform state file, and we are going to talk about this state file in a more better way in the Terraform state section. But for now, to understand like why do we need the Terraform state file is basically record all those changes which we are going to apply with the help of the Terraform code. So let's assume I write a code to deploy 5 virtual machine in Azure. That particular code first will create the state file, and then at the same time it will deploy the resources to the Azure portal or your Azure environment, your subscription. This Terraform state file will have all the record set of your configuration file and your actual resources. So if you remember in the course objective, I called Terraform state file the soul of Terraform. And that is the reason because Terraform state file have the sync between the configuration file and the actual resources deployment. So whatever we have deployed with the configuration file will be deployed to the Azure, but Terraform state file will have the record of your code and as well as your actual resources. So if you know the Azure, you know like every resource has its own resource ID, right? And its properties, right? the location of the resource, and then the other stuff like the configuration properties of the resource. All this information Terraform state file stores in it. And at the same time, it has the Terraform configuration file thumbprint. So basically it is syncing the configuration file with the Azure. And like whenever we are applying the resources or we are applying the Terraform configuration file, it actually deploys the resources. At the same time, it maintains that state file. So now, if we talk about like why it is different from the scripting language. So let's assume there is a scenario where you are deploying a resource group with the help of the PowerShell script. You write a code, new AZ resource group, the name of the resource group and the location of the resource group. You execute that code, it will deploy the resource group in your Azure environment. Now, let's assume you execute the same code again. What it will do? It will give you an error, right? Because it will try to create the same resource group again. But as we already created it, we already have the same resource group with the same name in the Azure. It will not allow us to create the resource group, right? Let's assume I want to deploy a virtual machine into that particular resource group with the help of the PowerShell. So first what I'll have to do is I'll have to get that resource group in a variable and then deploy the virtual machine underneath of that particular resource group with the help of the PowerShell script. But at the same time, if I'm writing a code in a Terraform to deploy a resource group, if I execute it the first time, it will deploy the resource group as scripting language. But if I'll do the same execution again on the same code, it will not try to deploy the resource group again, unlike the PowerShell script. Now what it will do is, it will show you that this resource is already available. There is no changes because you didn't make any changes to the code in your first execution and the second execution. So now there is no difference between the code. What does that mean? That means the code which we do have to deploy the resource group is in sync with our actual deployment. It knows that this particular resource group is already available and I should not create it again, right? And how it does know? It knows because of the Terraform state file. So as soon as I start applying the Terraform for the same configuration file, first it will go to the state file, check if we do have the record of that particular resource group already exist. It will see the ID of the resource and then it will go to the Azure and check if that particular ID or that particular resource or resource of that particular ID is already available. If it is available, then it will show you there is no changes in your first execution and the last or this execution, and it will not try to create the resource group. Okay, but in the scripting, this is not how the things happen. Now let's assume I have to create a virtual machine into that particular resource group. So I don't have to write the code again, or I don't have to do the get like I do in the PowerShell script to get the value of the resource group. Simply I have to go to the Terraform configuration file. I'll write my code for the virtual machine deployment, and at the time of the resource group where I have to put the value of the resource group, I just simply point that particular resource group, and what it will do, as soon as I apply the Terraform, it will go and check for that particular resource group. If it found the resource group with the help of the state file and the actual deployment, it will just simply create the virtual machine in that particular resource group. So this is how the things are different in the scripting and the configuration or Terraform configuration file. So basically infrastructure as a code is in sync with your actual deployment. That is the difference. That is the difference between your scripting language and the infrastructure as a code. In scripting language, it's not in sync. Every time you have to do, you have to first call that particular resource, get it into the variable, then use it and to deploy the resource. But in Terraform or in infrastructure as a code, they're always in a sync. You make the changes into the configuration file or the code and apply it, and the changes will be done into your Azure environment or whatever the cloud you're using. So they are always in a sync. They are always in a sync with the help of the Terraform state file. If we are talking about the Terraform specifically as an infrastructure as a code, then it will be in a sync with the help of the state file. So a state file is basically a soul of Terraform. Let's assume I deployed a resource group with the Terraform and accidentally I have deleted that state file. Then what will happen? So I'm not going to tell you this now. We'll talk about this in a more elaborative way when we are going to talk about the Terraform state. and what are the ways to prevent the state file, because it's very important, it's very sensitive. All your code is totally dependent on that state file. So that's why I'm saying it's a soul of your Terraform. So this is the topic, why Terraform, why do we need Terraform, even though we have the GUI mechanism or the scripting and all. The infrastructure as a code has its own pros, has its own values, has its own benefits. And this is what the benefits of Terraform or the infrastructure as a code. So in the next section, I'll show you in the laboratory, in the lab, in the live environment, how does the infrastructure as a code or the Terraform is different from the scripting language. Okay, let's have a look. Hi. So we discussed about why Terraform. I already explained like what is the difference between the Terraform and other way of creating the resources in Azure. Now I would like to show you in a practical way what would be the difference if I'm creating a resource through the PowerShell and the Terraform, and what is the benefits of the Terraform and how it is different compared to the PowerShell or any other way of creating the resources in Azure. So as I have mentioned before, that PowerShell is working on a based of imperative way. So whatever you want to do, you have to mention in every step. And then step by step, it will execute the command and will create the resource or whatever the configuration you are gonna do, it will do it. But in Terraform, it's a declarative way. Like whatever the desired requirement you have, you just mention as a code in the Terraform, and Terraform will take care of the steps. So we don't have to mention like each and every step. If you can see on my screen, there is a PowerShell script to create a virtual network. But before creating the virtual network, I'll have to define the variable. I'll create a resource group because I would have to put the virtual network in a resource group. So I have a command new AZ resource group which will create the resource group. Then I'll have to mention the subnet configuration. So as we know, like we would have a subnet configuration in the virtual network. So first we have to configure the subnet, and that is the step which we have to mention before creating the virtual network. So on the line number 12, you can see there is a subnet configuration where we are defining the name of the subnet and the prefix. And then at the line number of 15, we are creating a virtual network. So with the help of this script, we can create a virtual network in a resource group called Terraform, and that resource will be created in my Azure subscription. I already configured the connectivity from the PowerShell to the Azure, so it is already connected and the subscription and everything is already set. If you want to check, you can just follow the documentation of the PowerShell with Azure. In Microsoft documentation, you can see like how you are connecting, how you are authenticating your PowerShell to create the resources in Azure. I already set up it, so I don't have to do it. I can just simply go and run this script and it will create a virtual network in my subscription. So let's have a look. I'll go to my subscription. I'll go to the resource group section and then I'll refresh it. It might take a couple of minutes. So I'll just do the refresh. Let's have a look to the script. Yeah, it is completed successfully. I'll just go back to the subscription. I'll refresh it. It's not there yet. So let me do a hard refresh. Okay, I can see my Y Terraform resource group here. And if I go to the resource group, I can see there is a virtual network. And in the virtual network, I can see the name of the virtual network, resource group, address prefix, what I have mentioned in my script. And then I do have the subnet called subnet1, which I have mentioned in my script. There would be a subnet1 and the address prefix of the subnet would be the 10.0.0./24. So this is the subnet which I have created through the PowerShell. Now let's assume I would like to add a new subnet in the same virtual network. How I'm going to do that? Can I use the same script again? No. If I would execute the same script again, it might give me an error that the virtual network is already existing. Or if I'm changing the configuration, then the subnet will not be created because the virtual network is already there. So to update the virtual network or to make any changes into the virtual network, what will I have to do is, first I'll have to take the virtual network in a variable. So first I'll have to read the virtual network is a get-az virtual network command with the help of, because the virtual network is already existing. Then I'll add the new subnet configuration. Again, in the imperative way of working, we are mentioning each and every step what it will have to do. So we have this step to add the new subnet configuration. The new subnet would be the subnet 2 and the address prefix would be the 10.0.1.0/24. and I'm adding this configuration, and this time I also have to mention the virtual network, right? Because the virtual network is already there. So I just get the virtual network in a variable and passed it to the subnet configuration, and then I'll update the or set the virtual network. So the VNet, I already passed the configuration, and now I'll have to run this command to add the new subnet in the existing virtual network. So this is how we are doing it into the PowerShell. So if I execute this command, now I can see there should be a new subnet called subnet 2, right? So the subnet 2 is there, subnet 1 was already created. So this is how we are doing it into the PowerShell, and we have to mention each and every step in an imperative way, like what I wanted to do. At the same time, if I am doing the same thing with the help of the Terraform, so I'll have to write the code. I already have the code ready, and we are going to discuss about each and everything going forward. But this is just an example, like how we are doing it in a Terraform. So I already write the code, and with the help of this code, let's create it. So I'll do the Y Terraform, and I'll just mark it as a Y Terraform 2. I already have my virtual network name and everything I have already passed. The subnet 1, similarly, like PowerShell, I'm creating a subnet 1 here with the virtual network. Here I don't have to like pass the subnet configuration or step by step. What my requirement is, I'll have to declaratively put my requirement over here. Is a desired output I want. So I want a virtual network. The name of the virtual network should be this. Location should be same as the resource group location. Name should be same as the resource group name. This should be the address space, and this should be the subnet. If I run the Terraform init command, it will first download the provider. We are going to talk about it. What is the provider and what is the purpose of the provider in the Terraform. So first, with the help of the Terraform init command, it will do the initialization of the Terraform, and we are going to discuss about all these commands and everything in a detailed way going forward. Let's have a look. Once this command is done, then we can run the Terraform plan or the Terraform apply command, and it will apply our changes to the Terraform in our actual environment in a subscription itself. So let's have a look. Okay, so the Terraform initialization has been completed. It took a while. Now let's run the Terraform apply command, and then we will have a look like how the resource has been created in a Terraform. We can also run the Terraform plan command, but if we would like to see like what would be the plan of this particular code, but we are going to discuss about all these commands going forward. For now, let's create these resources. This command is also going to take a while because it is creating the resources in a subscription in here Azure. And similarly to the PowerShell, I already configured the authentication and everything here in the Terraform code as well, and that's why I didn't have to mention anything about the subscription or like how it is going to authenticate. But we are going to discuss about it, like what type of authentication Terraform do with the Azure portal and how it is authenticating the Azure and creating the resources. Okay, so the Terraform apply command is completed. It has added 2 resources. Let's go to the portal and have a look. I'll go to the resource group, do the refresh. I can see there is a new resource group called Y Terraform 2. If I go to the resource group, I can see there is a virtual network, and similarly I do have a subnet 1. Now we do the same thing with the PowerShell and the Terraform. It's kind of a similar. Apart from like in PowerShell, we have to mention every step. But in Terraform, we just have to mention the code, like what you want to have, and it will create the resources. You don't have to configure the subnet configuration. You don't have to mention it or something like that. You just need a block. You need a block for the resource group if you want to create the resource group, and then you can refer that resource group to the virtual network resource block, and then it will create the virtual network in your subscription. Now, if I would like to update or create a new subnet, similarly what we did in the PowerShell, how it would be in a Terraform. That is the fun part here with the Terraform. Now you don't have to do any get command, you don't have to put it into the variable, you don't have to do anything. What can you do is, you can just simply come here in your code, you copy the subnet block, you do the another subnet with the requirement, whatever the requirement you have. Like I do have a new requirement called I would like to create a subnet 2 with the address reference of this one, address prefix of this one. Now I don't have to do anything. I can just simply go and run the Terraform apply command again. what it will do is it will read the configuration, because as I have mentioned, everything is in the terraform.tf state file. As soon as we run the terraform apply command, we can this particular file is getting created, and it has all the information and it has all the mapping from your code to your actual deployment or actual resources. So this file already have all the information. That virtual network was already created, subnet 1 was already there. Now we just wanted to do update or change. So you can see when I'm running the terraform apply command, it is showing me like there is one change. What change is there? So there is a change. It is creating a new or adding a new subnet. So I'll just do the yes, and then I'll see like what would be the difference. I don't have to do anything here. I don't have to mention anything here. I just have to put my desired requirement in a declarative way. So I already created the subnet 1. Now I just want a new subnet, that is the subnet 2 in my virtual network. And it is modifying the virtual network, and once it is completed, then we will have a look. Okay, the changes has been done. I'll go here, do the refresh, and I can see there is a subnet 1 and the subnet 2 here. So that is the difference between the Terraform and the PowerShell. In the PowerShell, every time if you wanted to update or do any changes, configuration changes, changing the size of the virtual machine, adding a new subnet, maybe adding a new hook in your network security group or something like that, whatever the changes or updates, you always have to call the resource first, read the resource first in the PowerShell, do the get command, put it into the variable, then put every step what you would like to do, and then you update the resource. But here in the Terraform, you don't have to do anything. The references, the mapping is already there. If we would go to the terraform.tf state file, there are already all the information, the subscription number, the subscription ID, the resource group, every information is there. So we do have the code here, we do have the mapping in the state file, and then we do have all the resources here in the subscription itself. So we do have the mapping in the tf state file, which is mapping it, and based on that, it is whatever the changes we are going to do in the configuration file or in our code, it will compare it with the state file and the actual resource in the portal. And if it find any like a new update or changes or some deletion or something, then the Terraform will update it or delete it. So like I wanted to remove this subnet, then I can just simply remove this subnet, save my code again, and I can run the Terraform apply command and it will remove the subnet too. So I don't have to do anything. I can just keep my code in a way what I want, in a declarative way, the desired requirement what I have. And this is how the Terraform is managing the resources. And that is the difference between the creating resources through the Terraform and the PowerShell. So I hope you understand it now. And going forward, when we are going to talk about more in the Terraform, you understand more benefits of the Terraform, why it is different from the PowerShell and the other way of creating the resources in the Azure. So hope you enjoy it. Let's go to the next section. Hi, so in this section we are going to talk about Terraform syntax. Whenever I start learning a new coding language, the first question comes in my mind is, what is the syntax of that language? How we are writing the code into it? How we are executing the code into it? So I thought to explain the Terraform syntax first, so we know how to write the code in Terraform, how we are executing the code into the Terraform. So let's have a look. So this is a Visual Studio Code window, which is something you are gonna see throughout the course, and I'll explain why we are using the Visual Studio Code as a IDE tool and what are the benefits of Visual Studio Code with Terraform. But first, let's have a look to the Terraform syntax. So in Terraform, the file where we are writing the code, those files are configuration files, and the extension of those files should always be .tf. If you can see, there is one special file called terraform.tf files. This file is basically used to assign the value of variable. So let's assume we have some variables defined in our code. So, and we have to assign the value of those variable. This is something we can do into the terraform.tf files. The extension should always be the tf files to assign the value of the variable, but the name of the variable assignment file can be anything. But if you are not using the terraform.tf files as a default name, then you have to explicitly mention when executing the terraform plan or apply command. But if you don't want to explicitly mention the name of the file, then you can use the terraform.tf files as a default name of the file for the variable assignment. Now, let's assume we open a file called main.tf. In Terraform, whatever the code we are writing, they should be in form of the block. So Terraform code is always in a block format, and there are different type of blocks which I mentioned in the course objective. So let's have a look. Here we do have the first thing is a block type. What type of block type you want to execute? So here I'm using the resource. Resource block is something which is actually deploying the resources or creating the resources. Okay, and then we do have the data block, we do have the output block. So the first thing which we have to mention is the block type. Second thing which we have to mention is the provider resource. So whatever the provider you are using, like you want to write the code for the Azure, then you are using the provider resource of Azure. If you are writing the code for the AWS, then you use the AWS provider resource. Like let's assume I want to create a resource group, then I use the Azure RM underscore resource underscore group. And that is something you can see in the Terraform documentation for the Azure. So this is provider resource. And the next thing which we have to mention is the block name. So every block will have its own name. So whenever we are mentioning the one block into the another one, we are creating the dependency, we can use that name. Like I want to create a virtual machine 1 in the resource group RG, then I can use the block name to mention this virtual machine should be created into the RG resource group. If I want to create virtual machine 2 in RG2, then I can use the block name of RG2 and then mention into the virtual machine code. So it can create into the RG2. And as I mentioned, it's in a block format, then it should be under the curly braces. Okay. The next thing which we have to type is the arguments. So every block will have its own arguments. So if you have created the resource group through the portal or the PowerShell script, you know there are two mandatory parameters which we have to pass. That is name and location. So here in Terraform, we call them argument. So to create the resource group, we have to mention the name and location. Here we are calling them the arguments. And again, this information is something you can find into the Terraform documentation for Azure, because every block will have its own arguments. Like for virtual machine, I might have to mention the tags. I'll have to mention the size of the virtual machine. I'll have to mention the virtual network of the virtual machine. So all those values will be passed as an argument in the virtual machine resource block. Okay, this complete block will be called as a resource block. And as I have mentioned, we do have data block and the output block as well. In Terraform, we can always write the comments. So it's always good to have some comments in your code. So let's assume you're writing the code and someone else is reading your code. So it will be better for them to understand what you are writing into your code and what is the purpose of particular line and all. So there are two ways to define the comments in Terraform. One is you can do the hash, and that would be a single line comment. If you want to do the multiple line comment, then you can use the slash and then the star sign and write the command, and then you can add it like this. Okay, this is how we write the code in a Terraform. Now we write the code. I want to execute this code. How I'm going to execute it? So the first thing, if I want to run the command, then I should be into the same folder where I do have this .tf files. Okay, so let's have a look. I open this Terraform Syntax folder in my IDE, and I'm in a folder called 01 Terraform Syntax. Whatever the command related to the Terraform I execute here, it will by default consider all the .tf files underneath of that folder. Okay, we can always do like in a different folder, but then we have to explicitly mention with the command like which folder the tf files are resides in. So here, if I don't want to explicitly mention where the files are, then I can just simply go into the folder and run the command. As soon as I run the command, it will automatically consider all the .tf and the tfvars files underneath of that folder. Then I can run the command like Terraform plan command, and we are going to talk about the different commands which we do have, the main commands and the advanced commands, as I have mentioned in the course objective. We write the command Terraform plan, and then we hit the enter, and we can see there is an output. In the output, we can see it is mentioning like there will be a resource group created with the name of resource group -1, and the location will be the West Europe. Okay, so this is how the Terraform syntax is. Hope you guys understand how we're writing the Terraform syntax and how we are executing it. But I'm sure we are going to see a lot more in the next sections. Hi, in this section we are going to talk about benefits of Terraform. Why we are using Terraform instead of any other infrastructure as a code tool. What all are the benefits we get with the Terraform? So let's have a look. With Terraform, the very first benefit we get is the multi-cloud support. Terraform supports AWS, Azure, GCP. We can deploy the resources using Terraform in any of this cloud. Then Terraform works on a declarative syntax. And when I say declarative syntax, like you can just define what you want, what's your desired state, and Terraform will take care of it. You don't have to mention the steps or the workflow to manage the state or to reach to that particular desired state. So in Terraform, we just make the changes and Terraform will take care of it. Like I wanted to change the size of the virtual machine, so I don't have to return every step like what I do in the PowerShell script. Like first go to the command and get into the PowerShell, and then go to the virtual machine, get virtual machine in a variable, change the virtual machine size, and then update the virtual machine. But in Terraform, you just go to your configuration file, change your size from whatever it was before and what's the new desired size you want, and Terraform will take care of it. You don't have to mention each and every step or any workflow. Terraform will take care of all of this because it's working on a declarative syntax level. Then with Terraform, you can do the plan and preview changes, which we already talked about. So in Terraform, before applying anything, you can do the plan and preview of your changes. In Terraform, you get the state management where you can manage the state of your resources, of your configuration code. And as we discussed before, state is basically a soul of Terraform, which is containing all the information and keeping to sync with your configuration file and your actual deployment. The another benefit which we do have with Terraform is the modularity and reusability. So we are going to talk about it in more depth when we are going to talk about the modularity topic. But here, the benefit which Terraform have with the modularity is like if you want to deploy the resources multiple time, if you want to put some standardization of your deployment, like I wanted to use a particular naming convention in my resource, so I can create a module with all the standard specification, all the desired specification, maybe related to my company, related considering the security best practices and all, and I can create a module, and that module I can use to deploy the resources. So it can be in a sync with my company policies, security policies, and I can follow the proper naming convention and everything. And I don't have to write those code again and again. So I can reuse the same code, same configuration whenever I'm calling this module. So that is the one of the most important benefit of the Terraform. Then Terraform works with the parallel execution. Unlike the PowerShell script, if you deploy 5 resource group together through the Terraform will not wait for the first resource group to be deployed and then start the second. It will start deploying all the resource group, all 5 resource group together because they don't have any dependency on each other. But if you are deploying a virtual machine, you wanted to put it into the resource group, then it will wait for the resource group first to be deployed, and then only the virtual machine will be deployed. And this is called the dependency, and we are going to talk about it. There are a couple of types of dependency we do have in Terraform, but parallel execution is basically deploying all the resources together. Then we do have the versioning and rollback, as Terraform is an infrastructure as a code, and when we are talking about the code, there are versioning. There are different kind of a version, like if I'm making any changes into the configuration file or the resources, I can keep track of the versioning of that particular code by using any versioning tool like Git or something like that. So the another benefit which we are going to talk about is integration with CI/CD. So Terraform can be easily integrate with the CI/CD pipeline. And yes, CI/CD pipeline, we used to do, or we used to see the CI/CD pipeline with most of the application before. But now with the Terraform, with the help of this infrastructure as a code concept, we can integrate our infrastructure deployment with the CI/CD pipeline. And Terraform works very well with it. I would say it's one of the very useful benefit of Terraform, which most of the people are using nowadays to automatically deploy their environment, to do the automation of their infrastructure deployment. With the help of this benefit, what we could do is we can write our code for our infrastructure deployment. We integrate it with the CI/CD pipeline so it can automatically deploy to your cloud provider. And with integration with CI/CD, you just make changes into your code, you push those changes to your Git, and raise the merge request. Once it is approved, once it is reviewed, then it will be automatically deployed to your cloud provider. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to manually deploy anything. You can just make the changes into the code and it will be in sync with your actual deployment by using the integration with CI/CD pipeline mechanism. So these all are the benefits of the Terraform, which we can see and we can use whenever we are using the Terraform. So hope you guys enjoyed it and we'll see you in the next topic. Thank you. Hi, in this section we are going to talk about prerequisites to learn Terraform. What are the prerequisites we have to understand and to start learning the Terraform? The very first thing which we should know before it starts with Terraform is infrastructure as a code concept. We already talked about it, and whatever we discussed so far, what is infrastructure as a code and what are the concept of the infrastructure as a code should be enough to start learning the Terraform. As this code is dedicatedly for Azure, so you should know what is Azure, how Azure works, how we are deploying the services in Azure, what type of services we do have in Azure. So you should have the at least Azure administration level knowledge to learn the Terraform with this course. Text editor, IDE, it's not necessary, it's not required, but you should know like how to use the IDE, how to use the text editor to write the code and how it helps you to understand. And we do have a section where we are going to talk about the Visual Studio Code as a IDE tool. And throughout the course, I'm going to use the Visual Studio Code. So you will be aware like how it works and how we can use the Visual Studio Code to start writing code in Terraform. Next thing is version control. Again, it is not required, but good to have, as Terraform is a infrastructure is a code. And when we talk about the code, most of the time we are using the version control system to manage the versioning of the code. And as we have discussed in the benefits of Terraform, that there is one of the benefit is integration with CI/CD. And when we are talking about the CI/CD pipeline automation, we need the version control system. So it would be nice if you know what is Git, how to use the Git, what is version control system. But it is not required or necessary, or like without that you would not be understand Terraform. It's just you should have the knowledge of the version control, so you will know how the Terraform works end to end. Next thing is basic programming skills. That is again optional. If you know any programming skill, any coding language, then you will understand the concept more better, like how the if condition works, how the expression works, how the looping works. But it's totally optional, so don't worry about it. And one of the most important or most required prerequisites is to ready to practice, practice and more practice. Unlike other coding languages, you can't just keep remember the things. You can't just keep remember the code and the logic and everything. You have to do the practice. The more practice you do, the more you will understand the concept, the more you will learn the Terraform or any other coding language. So you should be ready to practice, practice and more practice. So that's all about the prerequisites to run Terraform. And with this section, we have completed our topic Terraform overview. And thank you for watching. Please like, share, and comment.